This is a tutorial on the use of AV pacing in the UniMocX system. As you note here, we have a patient that has low cardiac index, tachycardia, and by looking at the EKG, we have a fairly ragged EKG signal too. So we go ahead and pace this patient with AV pacing, and you'll note how things improve. First off, you can see the AV pacing tick marks on the EKG. You can see the cardiac index has returned to normal. Heart rate has been reduced down to the pacing signal. If we turn off the pacing, we'll go back to the original compromised patient signals. So let's go ahead and show how that's done. Okay, in the UniMocX control itself, we set an initial condition. And the initial condition is set so that, first off, we use the user data, the zero buffer for the user data, in order to have this button recognize when it's supposed to be turned on and off, when it's supposed to be shown as green or red. So that's programmed so that when it's on, it's green, and this user data buffer is set to 1. So that's how we identify that, and that's why that line is in there. Pacing in the UniMocX system is set up to essentially provide a signal to the chart at the beginning of the atrial contraction, so at the beginning of atrial systole, and another signal at the beginning of ventricle contraction, so ventricle systole. Those two values, those two times events differ by the phase difference between those two elements. Okay, we set the percent systole to 65. That essentially reduces the filling time of the heart, and therefore we'll get a small reduction in our cardiac output. That way we get our cardiac index to read the way we're looking for. We set the heart rate to 115 beats per minute. We want to show tachycardia so that we can present that to our audience. We set the beat rate of the left atrium driver to 500 so that we give ourselves the atrial fibrillation that we're looking for, so that it will be reflected in the EKG. So that is how we give the patient atrial fibrillation. The pacing button here is set up so that when it's turned on, first thing we do is we set the user data zero buffer to 1. That tells this control, the button control, when it's supposed to be green. Then we reset the patient to the default, so we make a well patient. We reset this data 0 back to 1 again. The first time that we set it to 1 is so that the button, what happens is the button always checks the very first command to find out whether it's on or off. When we reset the patient to the default, we set all the user data back to 0. So we need to reset the patient to 1 so that it properly reflects in the simulator what that data is, so that the button knows it's supposed to be turned on. Then we enable pacing in the patient, so we are now going to be sending the pacing signals to the chart as necessary. Then we set the body surface area, the BSA, to 1.75. Normal BSA is 2.0, default BSA is 2.0. So by dropping the BSA down to 1.75, we increase the cardiac index up to the value we're looking for. Cardiac index is a computed value, essentially the cardiac output, which is the true value that's computed by the UniMocX system, divided by whatever you set as the BSA. So you can adjust your cardiac index up and down by just adjusting the body surface area. So that's how we turn on pacing. We enable pacing, and we set these other values so it gives us the values we're looking for. When we reset the patient back to default, the heart rate will be set to the default heart rate, which is 75 beats per minute, which is what we're looking for. When we turn this button off, we do what we essentially had already done with the initial condition of the UniMocX control. We added one line in here to set the BSA to 2.0 so that we get back the cardiac index that we're looking for, which is below 2.4, 2.5. So that's how we turn it off. To show the pacing signals on our chart, we go to our EKG, and note we've clicked the pacing signal so that we're showing atrial and ventricle pacing. So if we go back to our slide presentation, we have our patient with atrial fibrillation. Turn on pacing. Patient drops down to a heart rate of 75, increased cardiac index to 2.9, 3.0 in that vicinity, and we are showing our pacing signals on the EKG. Now if we go back to our EKG and decide that we're going to not have ventricle pacing, we're just going to have atrial pacing, we'll go ahead and turn off that signal. And so go back to our slideshow. When we turn on pacing, it will appear as if all we have is atrial pacing. So you can demonstrate atrial pacing or ventricle pacing or both based on simply the settings in the chart control. Finally, you can put pacing signals on any trace. So right here we have pulmonary artery pressures. So let's go ahead and show ventricle pacing signals on the pulmonary artery pressure signals. Turn this back on. So we're showing our patient here with atrial fibrillation. Pulmonary artery is showing obviously just what it would normally show, but we turn on pacing. Now you can see our atrial pacing signal on the EKG. You can see the ventricle pacing signal on the pulmonary artery pressure. This provides you with also the ability to show the relationship between beginning of systole, beginning of diastole, etc. on the various charts. So that's how you handle AV pacing in the UniMocX system.